another episode of From the Couch Sports. My name is Connor and I'm your host. Today I want to get into the NFL draft, kind of give a recap of it, give my opinion on the picks, which ones I liked, which ones I thought were maybe taken a little higher than I was expecting. I don't want to go in and do a grades video necessarily. I feel like when you do a grades video, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up to get embarrassed. Everybody remembers that year that the Seahawks drafted Russell Wilson, Bobby Wagner, and everyone also remembers all the draft grades were giving them like a D or a C minus, and it was just saying this is a worse draft class, and it panned out being one of the best draft classes. So I will give my inputs on like which classes I thought were the best and which ones maybe not so much, but I'm not here to make a A, B, or C grade or anything like that. Just want to give my breakdown, my opinion on some of the picks. Also, I haven't got a chance to dive into every single player, so I might miss some players. I'm not going to talk about all 7 rounds for every single pick and every single player. I'm going to go through, pretty much every first round pick and then cover some of the other picks in the class that I thought stood out to me that I've watched play and whatnot. So to kind of kick things off, when I was figuring out what order I want to do this, I figured just start things off with pick number 1 and go to pick number 32, and then once we get out of the first round, we'll just cover the teams that don't have first round picks in this class. So to kick things off with the Jacksonville Jaguars draft class, the Jags selected Travon Walker, the defensive end out of Georgia, with the number 1 overall pick. And I think we talked about this in the mock draft because this was actually the pick I had them taking. I think the upside with Travon Walker is certainly there. He's got so much talent as a pass rusher. He didn't really get to utilize, he wasn't fully used as a pass rusher last year at Georgia. So I think the Jags, with their new coaching staff, are kind of banking on the idea that they can get the most out of Travon Walker and help him reach that potential that he has. And then with the Jags, they also traded up and got the 27th pick in the draft. With this, they were able to take arguably the best interior linebacker, the middle linebacker, Devin Lloyd out of Utah. Devin Lloyd, I actually didn't have him in my first round mock. I thought he was going to probably be in the beginning of the second, but Jacksonville traded up just to be able to take him here. And I think he fits in really well. I think, if you're talking in a world where Nakobe Dean isn't hurt and there's no injury concerns, then I think it's more of a toss-up. But with the injury concerns, this is a no-brainer. Devin Lloyd is the best linebacker in the class, and he should come in and be an immediate starter, help out this defense. And then getting to the second team, the Detroit Lions, second overall pick. This was also another pick that I had projected. Aiden Hutchinson, the home run pick, the guy from Michigan. You keep things local. You get the guy that everybody's been projecting them to get. Then they had the 32nd pick, and they actually traded up with their division rival, Minnesota Vikings, and were able to land Jameson Williams, the electric wide receiver out of Alabama. And when I was looking through the mock draft, I never even thought of Detroit as an option for Jameson Williams, because I saw Jameson Williams going in like the 10 to 20, 23 range or so, somewhere in that range, middle of the first round. Didn't think he'd be there at 32. Also didn't think that the Lions would even consider him at 2. But in this position, they were able to trade up. They got the 12th overall pick. They take Jameson Williams, and he comes into a team they're not in a hurry to win now. They don't have a rookie QB or a second-year QB that's trying to, have a big season. They've got a veteran QB in Jared Goff, and they're just building this thing slowly, and I think they're doing it the right way. And I really like the pick of Jameson Williams here. He can go and, take his time healing that injury. Then he can come in and, he can be a starter and he can be a big playmaker for that offense. And then the rest of the draft, I think Detroit did pretty good. They also got Josh Pascal, the defensive end. I think he's another good fit here. That was a second-round pick. Another guy that they can keep in the rotation, maybe potentially start opposite Hutchinson. And then in the third round, they got Kerry Joseph, one of the better safeties out of this class. He's the safety out of Illinois. I really liked that pick there. And then the other notable pick, I thought this was cool, is the James Houston in the 6th round. This is a linebacker out of Jackson State. Jackson State is the college that Deion Sanders coaches, and he's kind of going there and trying to, change the program around, start producing NFL talent. And James Houston's kind of one of the first guys of that. And I think here in the future, 5 years down the line, we might be talking about a lot of Jackson State players coming out every year, especially after they just landed the number one overall, number one corner prospect out of high school. But then bringing to the Houston Texans, they took Derek Stingley, number 3 overall. And I like Stingley. I thought Sauce was the number 1 corner in this class. I thought Stingley was drafted a little bit high. But when I was starting to do some research in it, as far as the Texans' perspective of this, I don't think the Texans thought that he would be there at 13. So there was rumor before the draft that the Texans were trying to trade up from 13 to make another move. But they might have thought, especially with the on draft day, everybody was saying the Jets were going to take Sauce. So they might have thought like, if the Jets take Sauce, then there's a good chance someone else trades up or someone else takes Stingley. So they take him at number 3. I think if they're able to get that potential that he showed his freshman season in college, they have a guy who can potentially be one of the best corners in the entire NFL. Home run pick here. And then instead of staying pat at 13, they traded back and they drafted the stud left guard Kenyon Green from Texas A&M. I think he's just the consensus number 1 prospect as far as the guard position goes. And he should be an immediate starter, probably start alongside Laramie Tunsil, and give a much better O-line this year for Davis Mills. And then they made a couple other really nice picks as well that I liked. In the 2nd round, they landed Jalen Petrie, the safety out of Baylor. I think he was, everyone was talking Kyle Hamilton and then Lewis Cine, but out of those top 2, it was kind of in that 3rd spot was Jalen Petrie, and a couple other guys were kind of in the argument there. I think he can fill in and be a good replacement for Justin Reed, who they just lost in free agency. And then staying in the 2nd round, they picked John Mechie, the 3rd from Alabama. This is a guy who's arguably the best route runner in the class. He's also tore his ACL. I think it was in the SEC championship against Georgia. So Bama just had a terrible luck, especially in the the playoffs and everything towards the end of the year. You get your 2 number 1 receivers injured, and I think Mechie would have gone a lot higher had he not gotten injured. But I think with the Texans, they can bring him back slowly, and once he's ready to go, they got a young piece in the receiving group. And then staying with another Bama prospect, they got Christian Harris, the linebacker, in the 3rd round. I thought this was a really good value pick. I thought there was a good chance he was going to go in the mid to late 2nd round. So getting him in the 3rd, I think, is a very good pickup. Another guy who can probably come in and, at least compete for the starting position. He might be able to start day 1 as well. And then in the 4th round, the last pick I want to talk about for the Texans got Dameon Pierce from Florida. This is a guy who's a lot more of a power back than a home run hitter necessarily, but they need help at running back. I know there was talk that they were going to try to get Breece Hall in the 2nd round. That fell through after the Jets traded up. But Dameon Pierce is another guy who can come in and help this backfield out a lot. Last year we're looking at Rex Burkhead was their leading running back. So getting anybody at that point, especially with the improvements on the O-line, I think that's a good move for the Texans. And then my New York Jets, pick number 4. I'm going to make this one a little bit shorter because I did make a full video talking about most of these picks. But first 3 picks of the first round, we landed 3 of them. So with the first pick, we took Sauce Gardner. I had some reservations about this when the pick happened. I like Sauce. He's my number 1 overall corner in this class. But seeing the fact that Kayvon Thibodeau was still on the board, I kind of thought maybe that should have been the pick. But nonetheless, I think especially the way that it's played out, it's been awesome. I think Sauce can come into this system he can be like what Richard Sherman was in the Saleh defense a few years back. I think Robert Saleh is going to really like having a corner like this in this defense. And then at 10, they were able to take arguably the best receiver in the class in Garrett Wilson. I thought he was actually going to go to Atlanta, so the Jets are able to get him, a guy who's going to be able to help out Zach Wilson a ton. It's kind of funny that you got the Wilson to Wilson combination as well, so that'll be entertaining to see. And then what happened is Jermaine Johnson just slid down some of the draft boards. I don't know why exactly. I think this might have been maybe a need situation, and teams weren't taking the pass rusher. But the Jets had him as a top 8 graded prospect, and he slides to 15, and at that point the Jets try to trade up for him, and they're able to make a move at 26 to get him. So getting those 3 like foundational building pieces in the first round was huge. And then on day 2, they're able to go in and trade up again to get Breece Hall from Iowa State, who was arguably the best running back prospect in the class. So now they pair him up with Michael Carter. They've got a really good young running back duo that can do it all. Good out of the backfield, can run between the tackles, good receiving backs. I think the backfield's going to look really good here for the Jets. And then in the late 3rd round, they were able to take the guy from the local kid, Jeremy Ruckert, from Ohio State, but he grew up as a Jets fan and everything. There's been a bunch of pictures of him as a kid where he's wearing a Jets jersey, and that stuff is awesome to see. I love seeing that as a fan. And I don't think Ruckert's going to start right away, but I think he can fill in and he can be a good rotational piece at tight end. And then maybe over time he can develop into a guy who can be the full-time starter. And then on day 3, the Jets only had 2 picks, and they called it a day. They took Max Mitchell, the tackle, out of Louisiana. They took him in the 4th. I think he's a guy that they're just going to kind of groom along, and he's probably not going to start or anything right away. But if an injury happens, then you get a better guy than what they have in Edoga right now currently. And then they also got Michael Clemens, the defensive end out of Texas A&M. And this is a guy who had a ton of potential. They said there was some off-field stuff, which apparently is the reason that he fell a little bit in this class. But seeing some of his tape, he looks like he could be a really solid contributor. He can fit nicely in the rotation on the defensive line. So I liked that pick for the Jets. In my opinion, the Jets had one of the best draft classes. There was a few other teams that were up there. But I think the top-end talent getting the 3 first-round picks is just going to be huge for the team and building things going into the future. And then the New York Giants, another team I thought did a really good job in the draft. I think their first round was just home run, and then the rest of the class wasn't as notable, but they still had some other good picks. With number 5, Kayvon Thibodeau was on board. He'd take one of the best premier edge rushers in the class, a guy who's going to come in, immediately make an impact. I love the fit there, and I was saying for a while before the draft, people were saying that Kayvon could fall to 10 and maybe even out at the top 10. And I was like, I do not see him getting past the Jets and the Giants at 4 and 5. And that's exactly what happened. He fell to 5 and the Giants took him. And then the Giants picked again at 7. And everyone was talking about how much they loved Evan Neal. I think they would have taken Evan Neal at 5 if Thibodeau wasn't on the board. But at 7, they're like, this is a no-brainer. Evan Neal is a stud left or right tackle. I think he starts immediately opposite Andrew Thomas, so he probably is going to come in and be the right tackle on this offense. But I really like the move there for the Giants. Then in the second round, they were able to take Wan'Dale Robinson, the receiver prospect out of Kentucky. And this is another guy that he's really versatile. He's really good in open space. I think he's a guy that can bring him on end around screen passes and, just get the ball in his hands. Kind of like not necessarily identical prospects, but similar to how you'd want to use Kadarius Toney. So I'm curious, does the Wan'Dale Robinson move mean they do anything with Kadarius? Do they end up trading him, or do they keep him and just want to have as many playmakers at the receiver position as they can? And then moving past the Giants, I got the Carolina Panthers. They took Ikem Ekwonu Ike Ekwonu, the left tackle prospect out of NC State. A lot of people had him as the number one tackle prospect on the board. So if you're Carolina, obviously we know at this point that teams weren't really high on the quarterbacks in this class. So that made it a no-brainer. I thought there was a chance they'd take Malik Willis. We saw Malik Willis fall to the third, so clearly the news and rumors that were out there in the media and online were not factual at all. NFL teams had a totally different outlook on this. But the Panthers get a solid left tackle, a guy that's going to help whoever's sitting behind at quarterback. And I think Ekwonu, him being from NC State's another bonus. I think that's a cool thing. And then the Panthers didn't have a second-round pick because they had traded that for Sam Darnold. They did have a third. They took Matt Corral, the quarterback out of Ole Miss. So I'm curious, is he going to come in and fight for a starting spot, or is he going to be more of a developmental guy? And then in the fourth, they also got Brandon Smith, the linebacker out of Penn State. I think there's a lot of upside with him as well. And then the last pick I really liked for the Panthers is Cade Mays, the offensive guard from Tennessee. I think Cade Mays could fall into a similar situation. He had a teammate last year, also from Tennessee, Trey Smith. Was it Trey Smith? Yeah, I think it was Trey Smith. He was a guard, took in the 6th round from the Chiefs. If you look a year ago or a couple years ago, these guys were, potential first-round picks, and they fell in the draft. And I think Cade Mays could potentially be in a similar position next year where maybe he gets in the rotation or maybe he even becomes a starter towards the end of the year. And I do like that pick for the Carolina Panthers. And then the Atlanta Falcons, at pick number 8, they took Drake London. This was the first wide receiver off the board. He wasn't my, I didn't think he was the top receiver in the class. I definitely agree. He was in the argument. It was a weird class. This wasn't like, Jamar Chase is clearly the top guy like it was last year. This was like, depending on the team and the fit, each of these teams has their own opinion on who that guy is. But I think Drake London he's going to be interesting in this offense. The thing about Arthur Smith, the coach, is he is just so good at scheming up offensive plays, and he can use guys in different ways than you would think. Like Cordarrelle Patterson, for example, career wide receiver, special teamer. He comes in and he just becomes like a full-time running back, still getting touches in the receiving game. And so you get Kyle Pitts, you get Drake London, you got two really big-bodied 50-50 jump ball guys. They're going to be crazy good in the red zone most likely. So I really like that pick there. And then in the second round, they took Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State. I'm sorry if I butchered that name. I think that was close to the pronunciation. He's a good playmaker off the edge. So they got basically their two biggest holes were receiver and edge rusher, and they were able to land two solid prospects with both of their picks. And then they also got Troy Anderson, the linebacker from Montana State. This is a guy who used to play quarterback, and he transitioned to a linebacker, but he's got a ton of upside, so he could potentially develop into a guy here. And then the Falcons took Desmond Ridder in the third round. I'm curious to see if he's just going to come in and be the backup for Mariota. I think that he has a similar skill set to Mariota. So if you're looking at what happens if Mariota goes down, is there going to be a guy who can run the offense the same way? Then I think Desmond Ridder is perfect fit for this. And you can let him kind of develop and see what you have there. And then the last pick for the Falcons I liked was Tyler Algier, the elusive running back out of BYU. This is a guy I watched a lot when Zach Wilson was playing there at BYU, and I think the Atlanta needs some more, rotational backs for the backfield. Cordarrelle Patterson is getting a little bit older, and I think you need some more help there. And I think with Algier, you got a guy who can come in and definitely compete right away. And then the Seattle Seahawks, they picked 9th overall. This was another one that they picked the same guy as in my mock. They took Charles Cross, the left tackle out of Mississippi State. Most people are saying this is the best pass protection left tackle, or the best pass pro left tackle in the class in general. And I think he's going to come in and help out quite a bit for whoever the quarterback is there. I think, like, looking at Seattle's draft, I think they're probably going to trade for Baker or wait for Baker to be cut. It feels like a good fit there, and they still have like a massive question mark at QB. They didn't trade for anybody, didn't draft anybody, so that was a little bit questionable. But then in the second round, they took Boye Mafe, the outside linebacker, that's defensive end from Minnesota. This is a super athletic guy. I had him mocked in the first round to the Chiefs. So the Seahawks getting him in the second, I think that's a really good fit. They needed some help at that position, so I really like the move there. They had another second round pick. They took Kenneth Walker, the running back out of Michigan State. This one was a little bit of a head scratcher, not because Kenneth Walker isn't a great prospect. I think he's probably the second best running back in the class outside of Breece Hall. But because they just re-signed Rashad Penny, and then they also have Chris Carson under contract. So it's like it seems like a lot of capital invested at the running back position. But nonetheless, Kenneth Walker is a great player. He can do it all. I think he's really good in the pass game as well, which maybe the other two guys aren't as good at. So maybe that's where he fits in right away. And then the third round, they got a guy, Abraham Lucas, another tackle, I think, who could compete for a starting chance. Maybe be more of a rotational guy right away, but I think he's a solid piece. He's out of Washington State. And then two other picks that I really liked for them. Fourth round, they're able to get Kobe Bryant, the cornerback who played opposite of Sauce Gardner at Cincinnati. And I like Kobe Bryant. It's funny because he's got the name Kobe Bryant, and obviously we're going to always remember the NBA Hall of Famer, one of the best of all time. But this is Kobe Bryant, the football player, the cornerback, and they just lost DJ Reed in free agency. I think Kobe Bryant can come in. They might be able to develop him to play a similar role in the defense. And then in the seventh round, Bo Melton, the wide receiver out of Rutgers, I believe. Ton of upside for a seventh round pick. He was one of the, I mean, I wouldn't say he's one of the best receivers in the class, but he was definitely one of those guys like I thought would go in the mid rounds that could come in, contribute right away. Might not be like a starting one or two receiver, but he's definitely a guy who can get involved in the rotation. He can contribute in the return game as well. And then that moves me to the New Orleans Saints. They had two first-round picks. They took Chris Olave. They actually traded up to get him at number 11. I really like Olave. The only thing is I thought he was going to go in the second. I don't think he can do as much on the field as Garrett Wilson. And the other thing, I don't understand the Saints' thought process with this, because they traded their future picks next year in order to get more picks this year, and it wasn't a down quarterback class, but they end up getting probably two day one starters. The only thing is, it's like, what are they going to do next year if they're not good this year? So that's the only thing I question there. But Olave, I think he fits good opposite Michael Thomas in this offense. Gives Jameis Winston another weapon. Jameis actually looked pretty good in the time that he was playing last year before the injury. And that was without Michael Thomas and Chris Olave. So now you add them both back to the mix. I think that's a good pair there. And then another pick I had the Saints picking was Trevor Penning at number 19. They actually went with that pick. I think Penning can come in right away and potentially start left tackle. And you're able to shore up that offensive line a little bit more. He's coming into a veteran O-line, so it's not like a really young one. He's not going to be asked to do way more than everyone else. So I like the fit there. And then in the second round, they got Alontae Taylor, the cornerback out of Tennessee. I think that's another good pickup that can start alongside Lattimore. And then another team that I thought was one of the best drafts in this class was the Philadelphia Eagles. So not only did they have a crazy good draft this year, they still have a ton of assets going into the future. But this year they took Jordan Davis, number 13 overall. They traded up with the Texans to get him. This is a guy, like, you're going to pair him up with Fletcher Cox in his first year, and then eventually he's going to take over for Fletcher Cox. But he's just insane upside, crazy athlete. He's a giant human, like he's 6'6", I think 340 or something like that. ran a 4.47, 4.78, and like just insane athlete. If you're able to develop him, you have a centerpiece on the defensive line. And then they had another first round pick. Instead of drafting someone there at number 18, they traded for A.J. Brown, the superstar receiver out of the Tennessee Titans. I mean, just the first two picks there are home runs. They had the cap space. They were able to give A.J. Brown a contract. A.J. Brown's got a good relationship with Hurts. And so now, I thought they were going to take a receiver at 18. So now instead of doing that, like they get a receiver that's proven, and you're going to find out like whether or not Jalen Hurts is the guy next year, because he's going to have the weapons on offense to figure that out. But the Eagles didn't stop there. They still had a really good draft class after this. In the second round, they got Cameron Jurgens, the center out of Nebraska. This is a guy like I think he fell under the radar a little bit because of the Linderbaum hype. But even Jason Kelce was like endorsing this pick, saying that he plays a lot like him, and I think that's eventually going to be Kelce's replacement, whether it be in a year or two. We'll see when he decides to hang it up. But I thought that was a good pick there. You get some depth, and then also a guy who can fill in for, likely a future Hall of Famer there. And then the third round, Nakobe Dean might become the steal of the draft. I mean, this is a guy, like I thought he was the best linebacker. You watch a lot of Georgia games last year, and Nakobe Dean is the guy that stood out the most to me. He, his coverage ability, the way his speed, athleticism, like he's just making plays all over the field. To see him slide to the third round is crazy. It seems like there really is some legit injury concerns with him. I guess he has some kind of injury that he decided not to get surgery on, that hasn't healed as they expected. So they're saying that he might either play his rookie season and then get an injury or get a surgery immediately after, or maybe he's going to have to redshirt his rookie season. Either way, I think in the future, Nakobe Dean has a chance to become one of the steals of the draft, especially how good he was at Georgia. And then one other pick I liked for the Eagles, the 6th round, they took Grant Calcaterra, the tight end out of SMU. So I remember Grant when he was playing in Oklahoma a few years back. I think he took some time off of football, and then he came back to SMU. He slid a little bit because, there was at one point in mock drafts I was seeing him in the top couple rounds. He was one of the better tight ends. But then he slides a little bit. So I think like getting him in the 6th round, you get a guy that can, fit in the rotation, and you're not going to need to ask a whole lot from him right away. I think that could turn out to be a good pick for the Eagles. And then the Baltimore Ravens, they had a crazy draft as well. Another team that I think had one of the best drafts in the class. At 14 overall, they took Kyle Hamilton, the superstar safety out of Notre Dame. Like the Ravens haven't had a good safety in a few years. Obviously, we know they had the Hall of Famer Ed Reed. After Ed Reed left, they filled in Eric Weddle for a couple years, and then they got Earl Thomas. And Earl Thomas had the whole falling out thing a couple years back. Hasn't even played in the NFL since. But they're able to get a piece for their secondary in Kyle Hamilton that I think can fit in that safety position and, potentially become a superstar. They have a lot of other good weapons on defense, so I really liked that pick. And then the Ravens traded Hollywood Brown for the 23rd overall pick in the draft with the Cardinals, which I thought was like a first overall, and you're going to have to pay him most likely for Hollywood Brown. I think that was a little bit crazy on the Cardinals' end, but for the Ravens, it's a no-brainer. And they land Tyler Linderbaum. They traded back from 23 to 25, and they got Tyler Linderbaum, a guy who's probably going to become a perennial Pro Bowler. And, in my opinion, arguably the most polished, ready interior lineman in this class. A lot of guys had him ranked in their like top 5 total prospects. So I think the Linderbaum pick was excellent. And then they kept making crazy picks. 2nd round comes. They take David Ojabo, the D end out of Michigan. David Ojabo is a guy that was probably going to be a top 15 pick before he tore his Achilles at his pro day. So they get a guy like they can develop him. They can give him the time to come back, get healthy, and when that happens, like they're gonna have a legit weapon on the defensive end spot. So I really liked that there for Ojabo. I think it's a good fit for him too. He's not going to a crappy team where he's gonna be expected to play right away and come back from the injury too quickly. And then in the third round, the Ravens took Travis Jones, the defensive tackle out of UConn. This is another guy that many people had in like the front of the second round. Not many people thought he was going to slide to the third, so that's another potential steal there in the third round. Then in the fourth, they took Daniel Falele out of Minnesota, the offensive tackle. This is a guy that kind of reminds me of Orlando Brown. He's 6'8", 380, just a giant human. I don't think he's going to start right away or anything necessarily, but he's a guy I think they can eventually develop him to maybe take over that right tackle spot. I think that'll be really interesting to see. And then they also took a pair of tight ends in Charlie Kohler and Isaiah Likely. I think one of those guys is probably going to develop to be like the backup behind Mark Andrews. So I like the picks there. They took a punter out of Penn State, Jordan Stout, and then they got a corner, Jalen Armour Davis out of Bama. So Ravens had an absolute home run of a class. Another team I think had one of the best draft classes here in this class. And then the Washington Commanders, pick number 16. This was one that I wasn't expecting. I thought that they were going to go receiver. They traded back from 11 to 16. They took Jahan Dotson, the wide receiver out of Penn State. I thought, just going into the draft, I thought he was going to go a little bit later. That's why I never really thought the Commanders would take him. But I think they had to have had a pretty high grade on him, and they need a weapon for the offense. So I think Dotson fits in well. So I like the pick there for them. Then in the second round, they got another defensive tackle out of Alabama, and Fidarian Mathis. I might be messing that name up too. I'm not sure if they're expecting to move on from Payne or from Jonathan Allen. So that was also a little questionable to me. And then in the third round, sticking with Bama players, they got Brian Robinson. This is a really powerful, hard-running running back. Another good, solid piece for the backfield there. And then the Los Angeles Chargers, pick number 17. They landed Zion Johnson, one of the better guard prospects in this draft class. I think he fits in perfectly on the O-line. He can come in, help protect Herbert, help out in the run game as well. And then in the third round, they took J.T. Woods, one of the safeties out of Baylor. It's a guy with a 4.36 speed. Really good, talented safety that can, get back there. Probably be like a depth guy, rotational, or used in 3 safety sets. And then another pick I liked in the fourth round was Isaiah Spiller, the running back out of Texas A&M. I think he's going to just give them good depth behind Eckler, just in case Eckler gets hurt again or anything like that. And then also with the Chargers, in the sixth round, they took Jamar Saylor, the guard out of Georgia. That's another good depth piece that I think maybe in the future could become a starter. So I like that move there. And then moving to the Tennessee Titans. So after they traded A.J. Brown, they go and they get a copy of A.J. Brown and Treylon Burks. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think Treylon Burks, his game is very similar to A.J. Brown's. He's another guy who's crazy good after the catch. He was one of my favorite receiver prospects in this draft. So I like the fit there. The only thing I don't like is you're taking Burks to just replace A.J. Brown, and sometimes that can be a tough task. You got a rookie who's never played in the NFL, and you're asking him to fill the shoes of a Pro Bowler. I remember the year the Jets traded away Darrelle Revis, we drafted D. Milner. And it's Darrelle Revis is on pace to have a Hall of Fame career, and we drafted this guy who's never played a snap in the NFL, and he's being asked to replace him. So that was that didn't make sense. But there's other examples like Justin Jefferson comes in, and he fills in the role that Stephon Diggs had, and he just, has crazy first 2 years. So we could very well see that from Burks too. Burks has a ton of potential. I think the Tennessee fit is awesome for him. And then also Tennessee went with Roger McCreary, the cornerback out of Auburn. I think he can pair nice with Caleb Farley, their first rounder from last year, once he's healthy. The third round, they got Nicholas Pettit for Ferrer. I think I'm messing that up as well. He's that tackle from Ohio State. I think he's going to be able to come in and maybe not start immediately, but I think he's at least going to compete for the right tackle position. And then in the third round, nobody expected this to happen. The Titans selected Malik Willis. I heard people say that he was an argument for number 2 overall, and then he slides to the third round. So teams clearly didn't believe that. But also, Willis has that upside, and I like this fit because Tannehill, in my opinion, isn't a guy who's going to win you a Super Bowl. So if Tannehill's not going to do that for you, then you got to at least have some other option that you're developing for the future. And I think with Malik Willis, he doesn't need to start right away because Ryan Tannehill is a capable quarterback. So Willis can come in, develop behind Tannehill for a year or two, and then when he's ready and he's got the NFL offense and the game down, then I think he can come in and he can be on a good football team. And so I really like the fit there from Malik. And then also they took, in the fourth round, they took Hassan Haskins, which I think is another good depth running back out of Michigan. And then Okonkwo, the tight end out of Maryland. This is a super athletic tight end. I think he fits in that Jonnu Smith role. He might be able to help out in, replacing that. Last year, you could tell that they were missing that position. And then, so moving on to the Pittsburgh Steelers, I love this class too. I don't think this one has been hyped up as much in the media. But number 20 overall, they take Kenny Pickett. A lot of people thought they were going to have to trade up to get a quarterback. But landing the guy who played at Pitt is awesome. The most pro-ready quarterback. He might be able to start day one. At the very minimum, he's going to push Mason Rudolph, Mitch Trubisky. He's going to fight for that starting spot. And then some other picks that I like. I might have liked these picks more than Kenny Pickett. In the second round, the Steelers took George Pickens. George Pickens, I thought, was for sure a first-round prospect. I think the injury concerns let him slide a little bit. But this is like Steelers receiver all over. Like, the Steelers are always good at taking these, second mid-round guys and, turning them into legit receivers in the NFL. And I think Pickens got a chance to be one of the next, star Steelers receivers. And then in the third round, they took DeMarvin Leal, the D-end out of Texas A&M. This is another guy I think that was supposed to originally go higher. He kind of slid down the board, so I think he can fit in with the Steelers right away and contribute on that defensive line. And then in the fourth round, this was another, I thought, a sneaky good pick. Calvin Austin, the wide receiver out of Memphis. He kind of reminds me of Rondale Moore last year. And he's an undersized receiver with explosive speed. He's small, but he's going to be a good weapon. They can use him in the run game, the receiving game, use him as a return man. I really like that move there for the Steelers. So regardless of how Kenny Pickett pans out, he is for sure going to have weapons on offense. So that's one thing we can't argue at all about. And I think that's good. And then one last thing for the Steelers. They took Connor Hayward, the fullback out of Michigan State. He's the younger brother of Cam Hayward. I think that's a fun move. Even if he doesn't play a lot, I know it happens a lot. Like they took I think they had Derek Watt a few years back, TJ Watt's brother. It's interesting for me because my name's Connor, and ironically, I also have an older brother whose name's Cameron. So Cam Hayward and Connor Hayward are now Steelers. I think that's funny. And then moving to another draft class, I think this was also one of the best, the Kansas City Chiefs. So everyone was losing their mind when they didn't take receiver in the first round, but they got two super good defensive players that are going to start immediately and help, transform this defense. They got Trent McDuffie at pick number 21, the cornerback out of Washington. In my opinion, he was the third best corner in this class behind Stingley and Sauce. So I think they get a really good corner for their secondary. They've really struggled with corners for years since Marcus Peters left. So I really like the fit there. And then at pick number 30, they took George Karlaftis. Karlaftis was on the verge of falling out of the first round. I think he's another guy with a ton of potential, and they're able to land him. He can come in, start right away, and help that edge group out quite a bit. And then in the second round, they took Sky Moore, the explosive wide receiver out of Western Michigan. And this is the guy, like, people are going to talk about, like, oh, you got to replace Tyreek Hill. The thing that's good for him, he doesn't have to replace Tyreek Hill. The receiving group got a whole lot better. They still have McCole Hardman. They got Juju Smith-Schuster, and then they got Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So you got a good overall group of receivers. But Sky Moore is also that smaller, really athletic, explosive receiver. So I like the fit there. And then in the second round, they also got Brian Cook, a safety out of Cincinnati. He can come in and bolster the group with Justin Reed. And then they took Leo Chanel, the inside linebacker out of Wisconsin. I think he's going to fit in perfectly alongside Nick Bolton. They're going to have a young group of linebackers, just overall young defense. And I think this is going to turn the Chiefs' defense around. I mean, that's been their issue. Their defense, like, what happened is, like, their defense was good enough to win a Super Bowl, and then the defense hasn't been as good since. And the offense has still been Super Bowl caliber, but when they're in the playoffs, their defense is not holding tight and, doing what it needs to do to win them games and get them back to the Super Bowl. So I like turning things around here with all the defensive picks. And then another pick in the 5th round, they got Darian Kinnard, the guard out of Kentucky. This is another guy I think is going to be a good depth piece, maybe become a future starter as well. So I really liked that pick. And then the Packers, similar to the Chiefs, people were losing it when they didn't take a receiver in the first round. I think what happened is, like, the first round receivers all got drafted pretty quickly. Like, we had a stretch. Drake London goes 8, Garrett Wilson goes 10, Olave 11, Williams 12, and then Dotson 16. So it's just like we had so many receivers off the board that the Chiefs and Packers were like, we're not going to overdraft someone right now. Like, let's go get our guys that are higher up on the board, and then we'll get a receiver later on. And so the Packers took Quay Walker, the athletic linebacker out of Georgia, at pick 22, and then at pick 28, this is another pick I had projected, Devontae Wyatt. They get a defensive tackle to pair with Kenny Clark in the center. So those two moves automatically improve the Packers' defense quite a bit. And I think their run defense was one of their biggest struggles last year. So that was big time for them. But then in the second round, they traded up to get Christian Watson, the wide receiver prospect out of North Dakota State. And I originally had him going in, like, the late first round in my mock. But he is super talented. And, like, it's funny because one of the pro comps that he's had is Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but with more upside. And he lands on the Packers. I think this is a perfect fit for him. I really like him alongside Aaron Rodgers. I think he can become a stud receiver in the NFL. And then the Packers also took Sean Ryan, the guard out of UCLA. I think there's a lot of upside there. And then they took Romeo Doubs, the receiver out of Nevada. So they get another good receiver option there. And then Zach Tom, another pick I really liked. This is like a guard, possibly a tackle prospect out of Wake Forest. I think he's the flexibility is really what helps out a lot. I think he's going to be able to come in, maybe not start right away, but I think he can become a starter eventually. And then the Buffalo Bills, they at pick number 20, actually, pick number 23. I think they actually traded this back to pick 25, maybe. Either way, their first pick, they took Kaiir Elam, the cornerback out of Florida. This is another pick that I had mocked to them. I really like the fit there in the secondary. They absolutely need help at corner, so getting Elam, I think, was big time. Then in the second round, they bolster the running back group. They get James Cook, the little brother of Dalvin Cook, really explosive running back out of Georgia. I like that pick. And the fifth, they took Khalil Shakur, the wide receiver from Boise State. I think that's a good depth piece as well. And then in the sixth round, they took Matt Ariza, the so-called punt god. Everybody was hyping this guy up as, the best punter in the class. I think he ended up being like the third or fourth punter taken, which was very strange. But I did like the pick there for the Bills as well. And then the Dallas Cowboys. This is a pick that's like gotten a lot of heat for some reason. 24, Tyler Smith. Before the draft, I saw a lot of people have Tyler Smith as a first-round pick. So I'm not exactly sure why people are saying this is a bad pick for Dallas, because I think he's a good pick. I think he can probably come in, start right tackle, replace La'el Collins immediately. So I like the move there. Dallas has always had success when they invest in the offensive line, so they're getting back to doing that right now. So I like that move. And then Dallas in the second round, they took Sam Williams from Ole Miss. This is another guy they say that he had some off-field issues, was probably a first-round pick if he hadn't had those off-field issues. But he can come in and kind of fill that Randy Gregory void that was left behind when Gregory went to the Broncos. So I like the fit there for Williams. And then a couple other picks I liked for Dallas. Jalen Tolbert, the receiver out of South Alabama. I think he's going to come in and have a good opportunity with Michael Gallup still being hurt. And then Jake Ferguson, the tight end out of Wisconsin. I think he's got a lot of talent as well. He can come in and give the tight end room a lot of depth there as well. And then the New England Patriots, this is a team that kind of got a lot of heat. Pick number 29, they took Cole Strange out of Chattanooga, the guard. I mean, if he starts day one and he's a good rookie, then who cares? Like I realized that a lot of teams had later grades on him. They thought he was going to go in the second or third round. I think it doesn't matter really. At the end of the day, Bill Belichick has won 6 Super Bowls, so I'll take his opinion on it over people in the media and whatnot that thought Malik Willis was going to be a top 10 pick. I think that's being talked about a little bit too much, and Cole Strange is probably going to be the starting right guard now that they traded Shaq Mason. So, I mean, we'll see how all that pans out. If he does become a bust, then so be it, and they can say that, oh, yeah, the Patriots shouldn't have taken him there. But if he doesn't and he becomes even a solid starter, then it's like, yeah, I mean, that was a good move. He fills a position of need. You want to get offensive line help for Mac Jones, so why not? In the second round, they took Tyquan Thornton, the wide receiver out of Baylor. This is the guy who, when he first ran his 40, they thought he set the record for 40 time. When they did the official time, they found out it was a little bit behind, but still even being close to the record is insane. Crazy speed for this guy. Baylor doesn't, and we saw this with Denzel Mims a couple years ago. Baylor doesn't run like a traditional NFL offense, so I'm curious to see how he's utilized as a rookie. But that gives you a good deep threat for Mac Jones. I think the Pats are going to like that one. And then the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals had a couple picks I liked as well. Pick number 31 in the first round, they took Daxton Hill, the safety out of Michigan. This is a guy I think is going to be really versatile. He should fit in really well next to Jesse Bates. So I like the pick there. I definitely thought he was going to be a fringe first round pick, early second round at the latest. So I think they're going to like that pick there. And then Cam Taylor-Britt, the safety out of Nebraska. So this is where I'm not sure. Are the Bengals planning to get rid of Jesse Bates? They're going to run a 3-safety set, or are they going to have one of these guys kind of slide into the nickel? Time will tell with that. But I like a couple of the moves the Bengals have made. And then the final pick in the first round was the Minnesota Vikings taking Lewis Seen, the safety out of Georgia. It's funny because I had him going 32 to the Lions, but I really like the pick there. I think, they trade back and they still get a very good prospect here in the first round. And then in the second round, they got another guy that I thought was a first round pick in Andrew Booth Jr., the corner out of Clemson. So I really like that fit. I mean, I had talked how Because I thought Sauce was going to go number 12 to the Vikings. They ended up trading back. Sauce wasn't there, of course. But the same kind of principle applies. Andrew Booth in the secondary with Patrick Peterson. I think they got a good couple corners, and he should develop nicely there. And then they also took Ed Ingram, the guard out of LSU. He could be a solid piece. He can probably start right away or push for a start right away, so I like that there for them. And then moving on to the Arizona Cardinals. They traded their first round pick for Marquise Hollywood Brown. That didn't make a ton of sense to me. But also, looking at it, looking at the different angles on it, this is a guy who has time with Kyler in college, so he's probably got a pretty good relationship there with Kyler. They want to make Kyler happy, bringing in a buddy of his. Obviously, they got to pay Kyler coming soon, so we'll see how that goes. But the other thing about it is, like, the Ravens are a run-heavy offense, and Marquise Brown still had 1,000 yards receiving in one of his seasons. So I think there's a chance that he can develop into like a Brandon Cooks type guy in this offense for Arizona. And then you got to remember, like, DeAndre Hopkins is the other receiver. So DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown are a pretty solid core of guys. And then you still got like Rondale Moore and some other pieces there. I think they brought AJ Green back also. So I like the group of receivers there. And then it gets even better for Arizona, because in the second round, they took Trey McBride out of Colorado State, the tight end, and I thought he was the best tight end in the class. I think he was the best kind of all-around tight end. Maybe not the best at any specific thing, but if you're looking for a guy who can block well, who can also receive well, I think he was kind of that guy. And he should fit really nice well along with Zach Ertz. And then they took a couple DNs in the third round. Cameron Thomas out of San Diego State, and Majai Sanders out of Cincinnati. Sanders, I think, slid a little bit because of the weight thing. He got sick before the combine and lost a bunch of weight. But he's a super talented guy, and so is Thomas. I think one of those guys can kind of develop to replace Chandler Jones. Obviously, they're probably not going to give the same production right away, but the fact that they have two guys, kind of rotate those guys, maybe you get close to 70-80% of what you had last year in Chandler Jones. And then moving on to the teams that didn't have first round picks, the Chicago Bears. I like a lot of the picks they made. It also is a little bit more of an underwhelming class when you look at everything that the Jags have done to help Trevor Lawrence, everything the Jets have done to help Zach Wilson, and then you get the Bears. They didn't have a first round pick because they traded up for Fields last year. They had 2 seconds since they traded Khalil Mack. And they take Kyler Gordon, very good corner prospect out of Washington. I think he's going to help out in the secondary. But then they also took Jaquan Brisker, the safety out of Penn State, another one of the guys who was kind of in the argument for best safety in the class. So, I can tell they're trying to revamp the defense. But it's also like, you guys got to invest in your quarterback. I mean, he doesn't have a lot to work with offensive line-wise, and neither does he receiver-wise. But then they did kind of address it in the third round with Jones out of Tennessee, Vicesis Jones, their wide receiver. I think that he's going to be a solid weapon. Some people were comparing him like Cordarrelle Patterson. He's really athletic, good in the receiving game, and a good return man as well. The one thing I think that might have caused him to slide a little bit is the fact that he's going to be 25 when the season starts. So he's going to be a pretty old rookie. I think that might have been what caused him to slide. And then the Cleveland Browns, they gave up all their early picks for Deshaun, but they were able to pick in the third round. They got Martin Emerson, the corner out of Mississippi State, and then David Bell, the receiver out of Purdue. I really like the Purdue pick. David Bell is a solid player. He can do it all as a receiver. I think his athleticism isn't like top end, so that's what caused him to slide. But with the Browns receiving core, I think he can come in and contribute right away day one. So that's got to be a good pick for them. And then in the fourth, they also got another solid player, Perion Winfrey, the D tackle out of Oklahoma. And I think he's gonna have a lot of upside to start as well. So I really like a couple of these picks for the Browns. Despite not having many picks, they were able to land a couple guys that I really liked. And then the Denver Broncos, another team without the first round pick because they traded for Russell Wilson. In the second, they took Nick Bonito, the outside linebacker out of Oklahoma. I think he's going to be he's more of like an edge rusher, outside linebacker type player. I think he'll fit in nice with the Broncos. And then the pick I liked the most for Denver was Greg Dulcich, the tight end out of UCLA. I think he's arguably the best receiving tight end in the class. Might not be the best run blocker or anything. I think those things will develop. But if you're looking strictly, let's find a replacement for Noah Fant. Noah Fant wasn't really that great of a pass blocker or a run blocker. So you get Greg Dulcich, arguably the best receiving tight end. That's a perfect fit to replace Noah Fant there, in my opinion. And then the Indianapolis Colts, they didn't have a first-round pick because they gave up one for Carson Wentz last year. They had their second-round pick. They got Alex Pierce, the wide receiver out of Cincinnati. This is another like big-bodied, athletic receiver. He's 6'3". They can pair him up with Pittman. So you got just jump ball guys all over the field. And then in the third round, they took Jelani Woods, a tight end out of Virginia, who's got crazy upside. This guy's 6'7", but he ran a 4.61 40. Super athletic, ton of upside to potentially come in and, at least, be in the rotation and potentially start in the future. And then also in the third, Bernhard Raimann. Bernhard Raimann, in my opinion, was going to be I thought he was going to be a, late first round pick, maybe early second. He slides to the third. He can probably start right away for the Colts. I really like that fit there. And then also in the third, they took Nick Cross, the safety out of Maryland. He was another one of those safeties. It's, not the top two guys, but he's definitely in the conversation with the other guys there. So I like the fit there. And then the Los Angeles Rams, they traded everything. the whole F them picks that the GMs, he wore the shirt, he's got the coffee cup and everything. They clearly don't care about the NFL draft. They only made a few picks. But they took Logan Bruss, the guard out of Wisconsin. He should be a nice rotational guy. And then Darion Kendrick, the cornerback out of Georgia. This is a guy like I heard a lot more about a couple years back when he was on Clemson. Like there was rumor that he'd be like a second round pick and everything. He goes to Georgia, wins a national championship, but still kind of falls. So there's a chance maybe, because he definitely had the upside in the past. Maybe he can develop into something nice, especially being a 6th round pick. And then a couple more teams that didn't have first that we're going to cover. Las Vegas Raiders. They didn't have a first or second because of the Devontae Adams trade. But in the third, they took Dylan Parham, the guard out of Memphis. So they get a little bit more O-line help there. And then in the fourth, they took Samir White, the running back out of Georgia. I think he's a good athlete. He can come in, fill in the rotation with the Raiders. They declined the 5th-year option at Josh Jacobs. So I'm wondering if they let him walk and then Zamir White can kind of fill in. So we'll see how that pans out. And then the Dolphins, they didn't have picks. One, because they traded up for Jalen Waddle last year, but also because they traded for Tyreek this year. So they didn't pick until the 3rd round, but they got Channing Tindall, the linebacker out of Georgia. This is a guy who paired up with Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker. So he should come in and give the Dolphins a good linebacker help. And then the San Francisco 49ers, no first pick because of the Trey Lance trade from last year. But in the second, they took Drake Jackson, the outside linebacker out of USC. This is a guy that at one point was rated to be one of the best edges in this class. So with a good franchise like the 49ers, I think they could develop him into a nice piece. And then they took Tyrion Davis-Price, the running back out of LSU. He's another good rotational running back. That's kind of the story with the 49ers offense, just getting a bunch of running backs and, rotating the guys and getting guys that can do a lot of different things. So I like the pick there as well. And then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they traded out of the first round, got into the second. They took Logan Hall, the D-end out of Houston. So another piece for Todd Bowles' defensive line. And then in the second round, they also took Luke Godek, the O-tackle out of Central Michigan. Some more offensive line protection for Brady. The third round, they took Rashad White, the running back out of Arizona State, and then Cade Otton in the fourth, the tight end out of Washington. So for the Buccaneers, this draft wasn't necessarily about like let's go get a guy to come and start day one and be a big impact maker. This was a lot about let's build some depth, especially like on the O line, the D line. That way next year when we're in the playoffs, we can make another run for a Super Bowl. Last year, for example, one of the big things that kind of derailed their run was the depth and the injuries that were appearing and whatnot. So I like the move for the Buccaneers there as well. They had a solid class. So overall, I think this was a really fun draft. I watched all 3 days of it. I follow a lot of college football, so I knew a lot of the prospects. Like I said, I don't want to go into the grades. I don't want to say like, this team had an A grade, but there were teams that stood out: the Ravens, the Eagles, the Jets, Lions, Chiefs. There was a few teams that just had really good draft classes. But I mean, the thing too is like they could also have horrible draft classes because none of these guys have played a single snap in the NFL. So we really won't know how good these draft classes are for another year or 2 years down the line. We'll get a better outlook to see how the players develop and how they performed their first couple years in the NFL. But that about sums up the NFL draft. It was a really fun draft. We went all in depth for the mock draft, so I had to come back and do a little bit more of an in-depth talk about the draft without doing the typical grades video. But I thought this was a fun draft. It didn't have a lot of quarterback talent, but there was so much depth and talent at other positions, so I think this class can pan out to be a pretty good one. And then, we'll look forward to next year. I know next year's got some good quarterback prospects and some other players that, should be coming into their own during this next college football season. So, stay tuned for content next year regarding the NFL draft. I'm going to probably go in even more in depth than I did this year in the mock drafts and, breaking down all the players and whatnot. But if you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe. It does a lot to help grow my channel. But thank you for tuning in. Let me know, were you happy with the draft class that your team picked? Was there any guys that you wish your team would have taken or wish your team didn't take? Let me know. Give me some feedback. But thanks for tuning in and stay tuned for the next one.